Hello and welcome to Read All About It, the podcast where people talk about their favourite and not so favourite books. Join me, Paul Cuddihy, as I take each guest on the literary journey of their life, from their most cherished childhood read and a book they'd recommend to anyone, to the book they couldn't be paid to read again, and much more in between. So listen, enjoy, subscribe and spread the word about the Read All About It podcast. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Read All About It podcast. And I'm delighted to be joined on this episode by Linda Jaxson, who is a writer, a singer, a publisher and a creative writing tutor. Linda has published short stories and poetry. Well, most recently she's published the first of 3 memoirs, The Siren Awakes. She's also the owner, editor of Seahorse Publications, which is a publisher offering opportunities to new and established writers born in Scotland or resident here. Well, she's also a creative writing tutor, having already gained a PhD in literature and philosophy from Strathclyde and Warwick universities. Linda also has 5 albums of music to her name and has performed throughout the world. And you can check out her latest song, Sirens, which is from her forthcoming new album, on Soundcloud. If you just check for Linda Jaxson and you spell that Jaxson. Linda, thanks for joining us on the Read All About It podcast. That is quite an impressive CV of a whole variety of different artistic forms. Is that something that you've always been interested in? Obviously music, but writing, and quite often combining the two?
I think I came up always reading poetry. I liked poetry, which was a bit of an anathema in my house, if you know what I mean. They were telly watchers, and I was always up in my room with wee poetry books and things. And my father was a fabulous singer. I came from a house of singers and musicians, like a lot of us did. That was the way it was, you know. And when I was doing my Bellsell Irish granny, it was just, you know, the other thing, you know, all the kind of, every kind of song you could possibly imagine there. So we had a wonderful time. Yeah, and I think I've always ran at life, really, to be honest. I'm quite old. I'm older than I look, I think, and I have lived a full life. That's what I always say. If I spontaneously combust tomorrow, boy, have I done it as much as I could have, you know. It's just I've always been quite busy.
And I suppose that the good thing of that, I'd imagine, is that you're not just focusing, because you're not just focusing on writing, as I mentioned, that you obviously write across the different forms. Obviously, you run a publishing company as well. You teach creative writing, and then obviously the music as well, which I've had a couple of listens to the song Sirens, but I thought I'll just have it fresh in my head just before we record this. And I suppose that's the frustrating thing of the lockdown, is that you were all ready to go with a new album as well, just before all this happened.
I mean, they made it Celtic Music Radio of the Week during the lockdown, so I had to do the interview by phone because it was all booked up for me to go on, and I was quite excited because my mother died last year and I had to kind of stop gigging just to, you know, my family live in Australia, and I just went to live with my mum, so I stopped gigging. This was me I'd been writing songs, so put them all together, and then Celtic Music Radio. But I also had really nice venues booked for the launch, and I started booking up gigs again because I had to kind of stop playing. Sometimes, I mean, I went out on the road a lot with bands, and it's very, very exhausting. I remember at one point coming home from a wee tour and I was shattered, had kids and all that. And I started reading biographies of women singers and think, no wonder they don't manage, you know. So I just thought, no, I'm going to go back to my kind of academic head and earn my money that way. And then I can choose what I sing and choose when I sing, rather than having that running about in the back of vans and for weeks and ends, you know. So, but that is where my heart lies, I have to say. I'm at my most me in the middle of a song.
And do you find as well, again, with anybody who does any sort of artistic form, when you hear the final verse, because that song, Sirens, that will have started, I'm guessing, just as an idea in your head, or a tune or a melody or a few words. And then when you hear, you know, does the magic ever end with that, where you maybe can still sit down and go, that's not bad?
I'm very, very self-critical, but Sirens, I have to say, I've got Alan Thompson on bass on that, and he's phenomenally good. And Morph, Kevin Dobie on guitar, great saxophone player. So the way that worked, we just went into a studio and Morph would play some guitar, and I'm quite spontaneous. I would just start singing whatever came out my head. Some of it would be naff, but when we did it again, I would say, look, keep that verse, and let's fix some lyrics there. So it's quite automatic writing, you know, and I can't play guitar or piano particularly well, in fact, hopeless. But I can sit in the house and play them and get ideas together. But that song, I never did that. I just literally went in and spontaneously came out with it. And it's funny because it was quite a difficult period, to be honest. And I think it's as real as it gets. And I can still listen to it and think, oh, no bad hen. You know, that kind of feeling. I just think it's okay.
I think that is quite modest. As I say, I listened to it just before we started recording, and it was one of those songs that, and especially when you're listening to the laptop, quite often you're listening to music. I close my eyes and just listen to it, which is what I think always what you should do with the music, and just listen to it. You don't not watching a screen, and I thought it sounded great.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thank you.
One of the things I was going to ask as well, in terms, and will kind of lead us nicely into the first book that you've chosen, and your favourite book from childhood. And you mentioned you loved reading poetry when you were younger, and again, does that help you when it comes to writing lyrics for your songs?
Yeah, I think Mum thought I was staying the night with a pal in Barhead when I was 14, and I was actually with a whole lot of people in the back of a van going to see Joni Mitchell in Wembley with Neil Young. So I was right into Leonard Cohen, Neil Young quite early, especially Joni Mitchell as a young girl. And these lyrics are poetry, you know, these people are writing poetry. James Taylor, I was a big James Taylor fan. So as well as sitting writing my own wee songs at that time, some of which I've still got, they were very influenced by these poetic kind of singer-songwriters, you know. So I would say definitely there's a coming together of the two things.
That's some gig, that, Joni Mitchell and Neil Young.
Oh, honestly. And he was very ailing at the time, so there was a wee rumour that he might come on. We were with like 18-year-olds who were ancient when you're 14 or 13, but they were saying, apparently Neil Young might be there, but I had kind of looked and thought, no, he's ill. But she brought him on, and together they sang Helpless. Oh, wow. Never forget it. I think my mum only found out about that about 10 years ago.
You kept it secret for a long time then?
Yeah, I did.
I mentioned how poetry links back to your first choice, which was your favourite book from childhood, and the book that you had chosen. It's called The Golden Road, which is a poetry collection for kids, and that takes you right back to primary school days.
This is it here, Paul. It's The Golden Road, and it's ancient. And when I always use this when I'm teaching for poetry, and it says in there, there's umpteen people had it, but it says in there St Charles' School, and then my own writing. My name's Crilly, right? My own name, so it's Linda Crilly, St Charles School. And I'll not tell you the date because it gives a lot away about my age, but it's totally ancient. So I must have been a wee mini tea leaf. I must have loved it so much I had to take it away with me, you know.
You're a woman after my own heart, because I've told this story often, that one of my favourite books from school days, secondary school, was Catch-22, and I've still got my copy, which fell into my school bag.
Can't stop ourselves.
I mean, what was it, even at that early age, that caught your imagination then in terms of those poems?
I lived in Glenburn, and I used to live up near the Braes, and I don't know how I got an education, to be honest, because I was dogging school and running away up the Braes. And I'm a big Christina Rossetti fan to this day. But there's a wee line in this, there's a couple of lines. Boats sail on the rivers and ships sail on the seas, but clouds that sail across the sky are prettier far than these. There are bridges on these rivers as pretty as you please, but the bow that bridges heaven and overtops the trees and builds a road from earth to sky is prettier far than these. That's Christina Rossetti's wee poem for children. And I used to run away up the Glenifer Braes and just lie my back up there and look at the clouds when I was quite young. I don't know how I survived it now. I can't even imagine doing that now on a bright day. I'd be too frightened with the places I went. But I used to go up there, and that spoke to me, that kind of poem, you know, just being outside and being somewhere and having a chance to go somewhere.
Do you think as well, because I always think is, you know, when you think back to school days, how important the books are that you read, but also maybe even the teachers who are giving you those books, but also giving you that lifelong love of words and, in your case, like poetry and books.
And you can be in amongst, I think, a lot of difficult teachers. I went to a convent school for 6 years, an all-girls school, and I was kind of lucky to get there because I came from a housing scheme and a couple of years before it had been free paying. So I think they saw us as the beginning of chaos. But for me, it was a saving grace. And you could have some teachers that, whether they were nuns or not, that maybe seemed a bit strict for you or a bit out in a different planet. It only takes one. It takes one teacher, I think, to invest and have belief in you, you know, and you can really change yourself around. I was quite wild up till I was about third year in school. No, I don't mean bad, just crazy, you know, having a laugh and all that all the time, probably looking for my stage, if you know, always making people have a giggle and stuff. And some teachers respected it in a way of being a personality or whatever kind of personality you have, but there's other ones that would crush. I always remember one woman taking me aside, having a kind of long talk to me, and I literally changed. I wasn't the girl that shook her hair out and took her glasses off and went wild. I was the girl that tied her hair back and put her glasses on. You know, I did it the other way. And I had kind of failed my prelims and stuff, and O-levels, and ended up with 11 O-levels. I just never stopped. And then I thought, and my house, while it was lovely, could be a wee bit chaotic, you know, when a little bevy and all that. And I remember looking about and thinking, I'm not going to live like this, you know, as much as I loved everybody. I just kept my head down, you know. So I think teachers can save people.
I mean, are you conscious of that as a creative writing tutor? And obviously you're helping people on their own journey, but the fact of maybe one thing that you say or point them in a certain direction, you never know where that's going to end up.
I hope so. I mean, I have had a lot of respect and kind of, not that much, won a couple of awards and hotels and stuff for teaching. I've taught all my life, primary, secondary, uni, colleges. My whole life's been teaching. And now it's great because teaching the centre for lifelong learning at Strathclyde, now you get people who maybe have just worked their graft all their life and now they've always fancied writing, or they wanted to write something about maybe a parent's life or something interesting for the mining communities and stuff. And I just say, well, you've paid your money, you're here now, let's go for it. And I'm quite conscientiously applying myself, probably above average, I would say. And that isn't me blowing my trumpet, it's just a fact. I know, that I'll work above average to help people as much as I can, because, and not just in the Centre for Lifelong Learning, I run my own things and get some young people on that, maybe just a wee bit, feel themselves a bit uncomfortable. Remember a fabulous writer now who's published widely, William Lepford, coming in and saying, don't know if I'm at the right meeting, when he was coming for an interview, he said, my father worked in the pits, he said, and I work up in the roofs. He said, I'm not sure if working class people are allowed to walk the earth and write poetry. And I said, just with your comment alone, you're on. That's it. What a way to think. So, and he's published, he's a fabulous poet, well known now.
But that's the thing, sometimes it's just somebody who can give another person that just wee bit of confidence and kind of reassurance that actually, they're not alone in what they do or what they want to do, but actually it validates it.
Definitely. And, I take that as quite a humbling experience, there's people that I work with who are much better than me at what I do. And that's a joy, you just see them writing something, you go, and then you see them getting their book out. And I just met someone recently, a book of his I've published, and he's maybe in his 50s, but he looked about 7 when I handed him the first proofreading copy of his poetry. He was just like, this is something else, man. I said, but he just loved it. And It's lovely to see that,
I suppose that's that wee bit of pride that you can have then of helping them on to that point where there's a publication there.
They're a bridge. I'm just a bridge, really. I see myself as a bridge. If they've got it in them and they're determined enough, if I can help them cross over to that and get it out and then go on to do other things, that's my job.
In terms of your own book choices, taking you on from your favourite book from childhood, and then I take a leap forward to kind of teenage formative years, and the book that you chose was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte.
I think I'm a closet romantic. Well, not that much of a closet romantic. I'm completely a romantic. And I think I'm watching my granddaughter now, who I've just given, she's a young teen, and I've just given her Wuthering Heights, and I've got the film, and she's reading it with her mum. I think it's a great book, but I always warn her against the dark Heathcliff. Every young girl, Heathcliff, menacing and dark, and, the one you want, even though he's very difficult. I always think you have to read that with a bit of, have a wee bit of warning call. But I just loved it, all the nature, and of course the whole romanticism attached to the Bronte sisters as well. I was quite in my teens when I went away down to see the moor and all that kind of thing. I live on my own, and I'm quite an independent person. I like travelling on my own. So, and I've always been like that. I've been married a couple of times and whatever, but I've not entirely on my own all the time, but I quite like a backpack and away I go, Australia, Canada. And as a young person, as I say, I used to go up with the Brazen Moon. So imagine all these sisters down there taking to the heath and their corners of the heath to write about Heathcliff and the like. I was blown over with that.
I mean, is that a book that you first introduced to that at school then?
I think I was introduced to it at school. Again, I think it was a teacher that mentioned it. I looked at Charlotte Bronte's work, and then we're talking about the sisters, and Emily was the strange one, the one that was a wee bit left field. So, I heard that, so I went away to read her then. I don't know if we would have been reading too much Emily Bronte in St Margaret's Convent. I'm not sure. I can't actually remember 100%, but that's where I would be introduced to her for sure.
Because there's a kind of sad poignancy, because that's her only full-length novel, and she passed away. It was published in 1847. She dies the following year without developing the talent that she has, but even seeing what the reaction to the book was.
It's very sad. And I think then when you see Kate Bush's interpretation through the song that she did, I absolutely loved Wuthering Heights, her floating about, dancing and escaping out the window and all this. And I kind of also thought that was Emily Bronte. I remember watching it and thinking that's like Emily Bronte trying to get into her life, because apparently she was quite secluded in herself and remote. So I know I was mad for Kate Bush as well, so that came back during that time.
Can I just make a confession here? I can't stand that song. I'm really sorry.
Well, you either love it. I think you either love it, because I you can't even say men don't like it, women like it. I know men that love it, and I know women that really hate it. Because you just think it's just like a laugh. What is she running about carrying on like that for? And in the video, people really either love or hate the video. I think saw French and Saunders doing a spoof of it, and it was perfect, and it was like the argument, anybody that ever never liked it, what they did with it just answered that.
When I was asking you about these choices, and you obviously picked that one, but you did mention the line where you said, my father used to balance this up by having me join him to watch Tony Bennett on TV.
My dad used to say to me, look, daughter, see what you're doing. He used to call me daughter. I mean, he's like an idol of mine, He's a fabulous guy. He used to say, look, daughter, see what you're doing all that up there. Namby-pamby, he said, I love it. It's developing a side of your nature, but we need to get you back down into the world. You have to do something for people. You have to be able to be in the real world. So we watched everything, minor strikes, and I went with the doors. At that time, we were working for the Labour Party. He was a socialist thinker, and I used to go down the doors with him. I actually remember going to this door of this high flattened pace, and this man answered, probably without an ass in his trousers, with a string vest. This is a way back in the 70s. And I was saying, oh, sir, I'm sure we can rely on your vote for the Labour Party. My dad would be up another high flat. And this guy looked at me and he said, you're not bringing that in here. And he said, I'm Tory. I'm blue through and through. The Crown, the Teen, and the Conservative Party. So I won't have any Reds coming in here. And that was Labour, And I remember thinking, that's incredible. That man probably can't buy a pint this weekend. And he wants to vote for the Tories and the Queen. But that's, what can we say? That's part of the whole thing. I mean, it's part of the problems that we have as a working class, people with working class backgrounds. Investing in those who will keep them in that place, So my father was like that. So he was always telling me, to get on it. So I did. I went to folk clubs, listened to Black Leg Miner. I was down in the miners, strike the miners, And Tony Benn, he loved him. But it did balance up the Wuthering Height dances.
Was that a household of like them encouraging you to read, or just, as part of your, was it
100%.
there, or just telling you like that's one of the keys, just read?
Yeah, my father, that generation, if you want to do anything in your life, just grow yourself. And the best way to grow yourself, daughters, to educate yourself. And they'd come from the Miners' Rows in Bellsill, where his oldest brother, Thomas, he went to Glasgow University in the 30s, and that's unheard of. I remember my old granny saying, you could get merchant seamen coming for the Miners' Rows, you never get an Air Force squadron leader. It's a big, huge pride. And I mean, I heard all that from my father about his oldest brother, who then, of course, died in the war. So that gets in. If you see someone that you adored being so emotionally moved in that way by something, if it's for your parents, it'll be for you.
Well, we're listening to the Read All About It podcast with me, Paul Cuddihy, and my guest, Linda Jaxson. Linda, we're on to the third question, and that is a book that you would recommend to anyone. And the book that you've chosen is The Loch of the Green Corrie by Andrew Gregg, and that is as good a recommendation as anyone can give. Everyone and anyone has to read that book.
You love that, I do. I every class, and I'll say to women, it's ostensibly about fishing, but it's about so much more than fishing, and it's like poetry when you read it. It's poetic prose all the way through. There's slant rhymes in it, I had the good fortune to introduce Andrew Gregg at I Write with his wife, Leslie Glaister, and I love her work as well. So I sat between the two of them, just think, what an honour this is, because I really enjoy all his work, the golf ones, that he's done them. And I think actually it's a wee bit like Edwin Welsh bringing a kind of people to writing that maybe don't read that much. I think Andrew Gregg has managed, a golfing book or a fishing book don't look like his. So he's introducing style and other levels of thinking, I think, to people. My brother's a golfer, but he just thinks I'm kind of, my sister's out there, he just goes to the boozer and Celtic. And he lives in Australia now and still gets the Celtic view sent over and all that kind of thing. But I sent him Andrew Gregg's book about golf, and that's amazing. And you can see it tapping on people in a wee way.
Yeah.
The Loch of the Green Corrie, when I read it first, I loved it so much, I just got myself together and went up to Assynt and tried to do it. I've tried 3 times to see the Loch of the Green Corrie, and
still no luck.
I've been up to, honestly, my thighs in these locking waters, and just had to give up, the rain coming on. And I think you can't do it on your own. You have to do it with somebody, because you start to get a bit worried as you're climbing these hills and you're up to your long waders and it's perished. You can't really see, and I think, if anything happens to me now, I'm had it, So I'm going to go as soon as the lockdown ends with a group of people, and we're going to go to find it.
Because I'm hoping as well that one of the positives of the lockdown, post-lockdown, is people maybe start to appreciate what's on our doorstep. in terms
yeah.
of Aston and these sort of places that are so steeped in not just the history of Scotland, but just the history of humanity and the earth.
I mean, I've because again, my mum wasn't very well. I didn't want to travel abroad, you know, and I've got family abroad. My in-laws are in Spain and all. I mean, I have obviously gone, but I have got. I mean, the Black Isle. I've spent a long time up there, and it can encourage me with my books. I'm writing a novel now, and it's got 3 settings, and they're all in Scotland. And I'm trying to kind of open these places up to people's interests, apart from the book, if you know, just to. I mean, the Ascent region is unreal.
Because one of the things when the Loch of the Green Corrie was recommended to me, and I hadn't heard about the book, and it was my pal who recommended it, so I went and got it. And as soon as I started reading it, I just thought it genuinely was one of the books. I mean, I must have read it within about a day. I just thought, this is just, as you say, the writing's absolutely beautiful. But there's always a wee part of me that it's not irritated. I always think, is this another one of these books that's kind of a great secret of Scotland, that there's loads of people who should know about this book but don't, and I think it should be more widely known. It should be celebrated as it's such a book that's entrenched in our world, really.
That whole area, once you go up there, you're on the clearances, you're on whether it should be called Sutherland, you know, you're on that whole historical trip with him, because you can't ignore it when you're up there. Once you, I don't know if you've gone up. I mean, I always say to people, go up to Ascent before you go, read this book. You know, you go and get the key for the post office man who's not there anymore. I tried to kind of do it. Yeah, I agree. I think there are some things that just they bang the drum about all the time, and then there's a book like that would tell you so much about this country in terms of history, geography, layout, and our beautiful stylistic poetics that are in there, you know.
Sometimes, and I don't know if it's a Scottish thing or a Scottish literary thing, I think sometimes we don't shout loud enough about some of the great writing that people from Scotland produce. Amongst them, this book, The Loch of the Green Corrie.
I don't know what that is. That might be one of these. I think they've talked for years about the Scottish people being down on themselves, you know, and the kind of, I think it was Douglas Gifford who died recently, talked about the schizophrenic Scot, you know, that they have a hard time with themselves. And it is that thing as well, you know, contrast with America, if somebody puts a light bulb on, they're celebrating it and telling how wonderful they are. And here people do great things and they kind of keep it quiet, you know.
And again, it's something I've mentioned in these podcasts before, is like I'm a big fan of Robin Jenkins, and I always think again that he's one of our best kept secrets. But I just think that there's loads of, and then when you start looking at some of the great writing going back, Stevenson, James Hogg, there's just like a whole variety of classic world literature. Alistair Gray, there's just loads of people that, you know, we should, you know, as a country, we should be absolutely heralding. But yet loads of people within Scotland have probably never read any of these authors.
Robin Jenkins, I mean, Stevenson and these people, they're celebrated, but Robin Jenkins is, I think, as you say, a bit like this. You know, those wee boys, you know, climbing up the trees, are so fabulous. I mean, Robin Jenkins, I love his work because, again, it gets right down to the nitty-gritty of the psychology of people and the way they are with the land. And there's an essential feeling with him that people are connected with the land. So I don't know why these things don't come out. They weren't on the syllabus when I taught at university, you know. You think per head of the population in this country, and the lockdown might be contributing to that. But even before then, I mean, probably post all the SNP business and looking for independence and things, I mean, there's a mushroom of literature. It's just growing, and photography and arts and music. Per head of the population, Scotland is well outstripping itself. Fabulous state of industries going on here.
Well, I mean, I'm happy in every podcast to tell people, amongst the many books to read, that they should read The Loch of the Green Corrie. And I'd mentioned to somebody recently, it's funny, you know, that way when you recommend a book, I do it quite often where I'll read a book. So, for example, I read a book on the story of the Wichita Lineman, the song, and it was all about Jimmy Webb and his career. And it's the most beautiful book. And I've been telling people.
Tell me about that, or send me an email with the details.
I will do. Well, what I'll say, I'll send you an email, because part of my story is I've been telling friends and they're saying, "Oh, that sounds like a great book," but I'm loath to loan it out because I can't bear to part with it at the moment. But the book itself is just so, because it's such a fantastic song, but it's just about so much more than just that song. So,
do you read books a few times?
No, not really, no. I mean, there's occasional books where I'll read again, but I just always, whenever I go to pick up a book that I've maybe read before, I think, well, there's a whole pile of books I've never read before, new and old, that I think I should really read them. But there's very few that I go back to. But there's loads that I'm loath to part with.
I know. And working and teaching, I've given so many things away to say, like Neil Young's Harvest. I must have bought that album 6 times because I say, you need this. This is what you need. And they go away with it. And then you never see it again. Loch of the Green Corrie, you need this. I don't know how many copies of that I've bought. Now I just say, you've had it. You know, you're not getting anything. This is where you can buy it. You're not getting it. I love it. And at every class every class I've come in the last few years, I mean, I've introduced them to it because I just think if anybody wants to write, there's something so special in that book.
We take you from a book that you would recommend to anyone, as I say, that's as good a recommendation as any, to a book that you couldn't be paid to read again. And you didn't kind of go into the specifics of any particular author or book, but you just mentioned the endless stream of crime fiction by people like James Patterson and people of that ilk, so formulaic. And interestingly, I've never read a James Patterson book, and he's sold something like 300 million copies. He's published 147 novels in the last 44 years, so that's over 3 novels a year. But it's like a brand rather than an artist. Yeah. And he doesn't always write his own. He's maybe got the idea, but it's a James Patterson brand, but somebody else, maybe a ghostwriter, is actually writing the book.
And I feel kind of, I suppose, I don't want to take anything away from people who love crime fiction because it sells in the Scottish, Tartan Noir. I can read that. It's not like crime fiction per se, but some of these formulaic ones, just like that. It's an industry. And if you're working in publishing or you're looking at new writers, it's quite off-putting if you go into any shop when there were bookshops and see nothing from here, because what it is all these crime stories or love stories from that industry. It's just multi-million-dollar, and I think the quality of the writing, whatever it is, I don't even want to know anymore because I feel irritated by the swamping of the market in shops like Asda and all these big places. You have to say, is there any Scottish literature in Waterstones? It's got better now, but with the demise of bookshops, we're seeing such a demise of choice. And these ones that sell at airports, 10 a penny, are everywhere. And as you say, absolutely, I think it's just, James Patterson at least now puts another name beside it. It's like these are the Barbara Cartland love stories. There's a formula. If you just start in a different name and maybe another week in a storyline, it just feels a bit. But, lots of people love them, obviously. They're first off the shelves as well.
Also, I think, it was interesting. It was a great quote. I think it was Stephen King said of James Patterson, a terrible writer, but very successful. So he's not a big fan. But I often feel, you mentioned about like the supermarkets, they have a limited amount of books that they stock. I'm never quite sure if the books are stocked because they're popular or they're popular because they're stocked. And I think sometimes it's not insulting to people who would go into a supermarket to read, but it's not giving them the choice. If you didn't put those books, but put a whole range of other books, say just like a whole shelf of, Scottish books, new and old, they would be successful as well because that's the market. There's thousands of people going through these shops every week and are looking to read. If that's all it's there, that's all they're going to...
Probably finance again, somebody will be paying somebody to put them on the shelves.
Yeah.
Whereas there's not the money here to do that. I'm always saying to people, I think small publishing is the way to go for MD, or publish yourself if you can, because you'll try and get quality work out there, whereas I think where you've got that monolith that's just pushing stuff with finance behind it, the quality of the work's not always there. I'm not saying it always is not there, but most often I think it's just the business. That's the sad thing. We know that. Everybody knows that. Everybody around artists, writers, musicians, whatever, make much more money than they ever make. But I was interested watching James Patterson. I think it was him that was behind the Epstein video, which I watched recently. So I was quite impressed. I think it's him, because he looked into that as the massive crime, and he seems to be behind the production of the storyline of that video, although it's not fiction.
When I was just doing some research on him, he's described in his kind of even Wikipedia entry as a writer and a philanthropist. So he's he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but he's very much into supporting public libraries in America and, various campaigns with, Scholastic books in America in terms of trying to encourage young people to read. So in terms of, he's using some of that wealth to try and encourage people to read, to give access to people who might not be allowed or able to get books. So, while the quality, you could argue for or against it, but he's actually doing some positive things in terms of encouraging people, the future generations, in terms of literacy in America.
Fantastic. I didn't know anything about that, and that's what I'm saying. And I think even doing that, if he's behind the Jeffrey Epstein thing, that's a kind of a moral, his moral compass is waving, big time there to try and get something in that. So yeah, I think it's... I think that's very commendable. I didn't know that. You
mentioned there when we were just talking about in terms of publishing and the big publishers and how they deal with it, and the smaller publishers. And I'd mentioned in the introduction that you kind of owner and the editor of Seahorse Publications. Again, when I was just looking on the website, it's that platform that you're trying to give to new but also established writers, either Scottish or resident here, just because sometimes I think for a lot of writers, they feel maybe there's nowhere that they can go to get their work published, which is a great frustration.
Well, there isn't. That's the fact. There isn't. The publishing industry's on its knees just now, the bigger ones. So I had just started that originally. I mean, to be honest, I need to look at a business model, and MD knows and watches this will say that. You know, I should be maybe setting up as a charity and applying for money. I just fed it away in here like a rodent, doing it for nothing, bringing it out for nothing. And then, well, I have to sell the book to try and recoup the cost of the graphics and the print costs and stuff. But the thing is, I know that I'll have to look into a way of trying to fund it properly, or it will die like everything else, because I'll die of exhaustion trying to do it. I just spoke to a couple of people this morning and said, we need to move it back 6 months because, you know, I'm pretty tired. And also I want to try and finish a project of my own and send that away to another publisher. I mean, that first memoir I brought out on my own with the Seahorse, the reason being memoirs are things I feel I want complete control of that. I'll bring the 3 of them out, but I've got a novel kind of in the wings, and I will try and send that somewhere else, but I know it'll be hideously difficult because there's no money. There's no money. I mean, the internet's done a lot of wonderful things, not least withstanding it and chatting to you today, but it's lost a lot for people in terms of downloading books for half a pence and all this. I think Amazon as well. I've got a few friends that have actually, you know, they just get the thing together and send it to Amazon and they put it together for you and all of that. And I think there's a lot of ways forward. I've got a kind of funny thing about Amazon, you know, the company, which maybe is a wee bit too, you know, stand in my moral ground a little bit. But I'm at an age now where I can and don't bother. Whereas I think if you're a young person, you just have to put a lot of things aside and fare it forward how you can.
About 5 years ago, I wrote a book called Read All About It, and it was basically charting my year of trying to read more books, and then just how I got on with that, what I was reading and how it was impacting on my life. And I wanted it out as soon as possible after the end of the year. So I knew it was going to be difficult, A, to get a publisher, but also B, the publishing schedules are such that if you give them a book, it's maybe like 2 years before they get published. And I thought that's not going to work. So I went down that road of self-publishing it. So effectively I controlled everything in terms of all the design, all the layout. They host it. It's like a print and demand service. So people can download it on Kindle. And if you want a hard copy, they just print. So if you want one, they'll print one. If you want 10, they'll print 10 that way. So there's no cost to you as an author. You don't feel as if you've lost any money. There's only a limited amount of markets. Obviously, it's just through Amazon. But again, you know, like sometimes you get a project and you've finished it and you want it out because you want to move on to the next thing. Yeah. So it was quite good in that way because I then had a physical book, and then I could move on to the next thing that I was writing.
Have you still got copies?
I do, and unlike the Wichita Lineman book, I can send you.
That would be fab. I would love to read that. No, I think that is a big frustration because when people are writing something, they live, work and breathe it, and then they send it away and a publisher said, we might be interested, but our backlogs. I know one person who's done this, and it's a really great book. It's 4 years, 3.5 to 4 years. And that's not guaranteeing that they'll use it, because if the market's changed at that time, they won't, but they can hold on to your book as well. Yeah. So it's very difficult. I think it's the same in the music industry. People will take on people to do an album, and then they might not bring it out because they've got somebody quite like that that's paid more money to get out there. So you've got people who are heart and soul involved in that creative enterprise who are walking up against business, hardcore business, you know, and I think that's what I wanted to do, just bring it out, and that's where I am with other people. I've got a wee editing service, but mostly if I really like someone's work, I'll say, I'll bring it out for you and just work away at it. And then I have to I'm quite good at organising events, and I usually sell maybe 80. It's difficult just now, you know, because you can't have them, but I would have maybe, my friend Leslie Benzie, I've just brought out her Fessin book, which is fabulous poetry collection, but we had 4 launches, one in Aberdeen, one in Dundee, 2 in Glasgow. We were looking at another one in Edinburgh. We would have sold a lot of books. So I've got them carpet on the floor now because the lockdown, we came out the week before lockdown. So I walk on them now, not quite. You know, we've sold some online. You don't sell the same stuff online.
As you say, if it's an event, then people get to hear the author reading from their work, get a chance to interact, and that is the best way. I think for every publisher, that's the best way for selling books as well.
So would you still try and sell your book, or you don't do anything with it now because it's over time?
I don't. It's there. It's always there. So if somebody goes on, they can see it. I've got copies that, as I say, I can, you know, every now and again I'll just send them out to somebody if they want to read it. I like what they did with it. I thought the quality was really good. I didn't feel that if somebody was putting it beside another book, you would necessarily go, well, that's the self-published one and that's the traditional.
And did you pick an image for it and all that?
Yeah, you can do. They can give you the option of designing something. You know, they have some sort of program where you can design it. But I had a friend who designed the cover. So you download the book template. you format it all yourself, and in terms of then upload that, you upload the cover, and then you can get a proof copy before they actually put it on sale. So it was a really straightforward process, and actually quite enjoyable, just the whole design and layout of it, as well as writing the book.
My friend Jacqueline Smith has just brought out of Slaves to Men and Gods, and she designed the cover as well. Very clever, and she's done that through Amazon, and she's getting quite a lot of sales. It's based in Ghana, so this book's actually will sell over there, because it's worldwide, I suppose.
Well, I stumbled upon it because it was a book I'd ordered, and it was from a traditional publisher, but it was quite a small publisher, and they used Amazon rather than print too many copies and have stock there that they maybe might take them years to get rid of it. They had a small amount of stock which they would have used for bookshops, but then for individual customers, they just used the Amazon service because it's a print and demand, so it cut down their costs. So I could understand that makes sense as well. So publishers as well as individuals can use it.
You're caught in the middle. Amazon's a massive corporation.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm not in commission for Amazon here, just in case everybody's thinking.
No, it's just such a big monolith. And then I've now got this thing about the graphic designer I use. He does a great job. I mean, he's got a job, but and then the printer I use, I know that they can struggle a bit. And I know if I sent it away to a Polish printer, like I know people that do it, there's a Polish printer who'll do them for like $150 a copy.
Yeah.
I might pay $350 a copy, but I'm keeping that guy who's working away there in his wee shop, and it's like that whole thing. As I say, my children are raised now, I don't need to think too much about it, and I'm not starving. Whereas if I was at a different point in my life, I would maybe not have capacity to think about any of these moral things or whatever. I would just be doing whatever I could do,
In terms of the podcast, we're on to the fifth and final question, and that is the book that you're currently reading. And the book that you've chosen is Reckless Daughter, which is a biography of Joni Mitchell, who you mentioned right at the beginning of the podcast. And, you mentioned she's a huge influence on your musical life.
Yeah, deep breath, she is. The circle game, starting from the beginning and then to the end, it's really always about her. I mean, when I read these biographies, this is one I hadn't read, but I read these biographies of her, she probably could be quite stroppy and would have needed to be, I imagine. But it's just her actual the lyrics, and some people find her voice a bit squeaky, and sometimes it can be. And then I got a fabulous, again, Morph, he plays Joni Mitchell. And my friend Liz Thompson, her brother Steve Riley, and he plays piano. And the musicians I got together to do a Joni Mitchell show are like me with her. They it's such an investment their whole life. And you can tell when you say, and I met Steve, and it was always wanted to sing Blue all my life. I heard it. And I'd set him down a few things. I said, I'm going to try this Joni Mitchell review thing. So I sent him down some songs, and then he came into the studio, and I just met him, shook his hand. And as I say, he's a friend of a good friend of mine, a brother of a good friend of mine. So I said, have you managed to do Blue? Did you manage to do it? He said, oh yeah, I've been living it my whole life. And he just sat down and started it. I could hardly speak. We did the review, and it was really well received. So there's something when you really somebody goes in at an early point in your life, Unfortunately, the musicians I worked with during that had the same feeling about her. But I think she was an inspired writer and miles away beyond, like, for me, Dylan and all that. Dylan, I think, is like a wee bit adapting from other people, Guthrie and everything, whereas I think she's a total original, even her chord structures and all that. So I love her, and I love her work, and I love reading about her. In fact, I had the film Women of Heart and Mind on the other night, and I was doing something, just getting organised with something, and I could listen to the talk about the film, but as soon as she started a song, I had to stop. I had to stop dead. Even when I never turned around and looked at it, I had to just stop.
And do you find when you're reading the book, you've got her singing in your head?
Yeah, this David Jaffa book, he does make lots of references to lyrics from her songs. So he will mention the songs and where they came at certain times in her life. Well, obviously with me trying to write my own memoirs, and I've sang since I was 7, singing in Melbourne, singing in wherever. There's something to, I get it. It doesn't matter what level of success, whether it's Joni Mitchell or me playing about in bands. There is something about the integrity of trying to sing from a very special part of yourself, something that really means a lot to you, and get it across, and that circle out to the audience and let them not just hear it, but take it on. And that's what I was trying to do with the Sirens album. The Sirens albums, in fact, there's a song on it called Harvest. And while I was in the studio recently, in February, doing it, I said, we need to stop. We need to stop. And the guitarist said, why do we need to stop? I said, I'm stealing this. I know this song. I've stolen this from somewhere. I'm not making it up. And then I went home, and because I just moved house recently, I'm still opening boxes. And there was a couple of boxes you carry everywhere forever. And I thought, right, these are getting shredded and in the bin. And I opened this book, and I found a notebook, which I've still got from when I was 14, Harvest by Linda Jaxson.
Wow.
Like, yeah, answer, I've been stealing it for myself.
That's incredible.
Stealing it for my 14-year-old self. you know, and it's a really emotional song, and it's got that Joni Mitchell feel, I kind of say, you know, because a wee bit the same with Sirens, a bit interior, you know, that kind of try to bring something out for your inside, or something that lives in you and comes out occasionally. So that kind of song. So I just thought, well, I've always been a weirdo, obviously. I wrote it when I was 14.
So is that kind of just then been implanted in you, in your subconscious for all those years?
And I started singing this song, and I thought, and he said, guitarist said, is this not Neil Young's Harvest? He did a Harvest. I said, no, it's somebody's, but it's not that. But I know these lyrics, so we just need to stop. So what a phone call that was, when I phoned him and said, look, I'm bringing the book. I can show you my wee fancy writing and everything, you know. It was such a joy. I think it's her that's influenced me with all that.
When I had a listen on the Soundcloud, is there a Joni Mitchell song on that? One of you cover, I can't remember what song it was. I kind of had to quite listen to some of the other songs, and I can't remember which one it was. It was only the second or third one down, and it was a Joni Mitchell song.
The very final song on the new album is the first time I've ever done it, and it's Woodstock.
Right.
I did a version of Woodstock, and I was very nervous because it's like touching the Queen, you know, or not that Queen, Reckless Daughter Queen. And I feel I did it justice. It's, you know, everybody feels okay about it. I do as well.
My favourite Joni Mitchell song is River, which I just think is just perfect.
I'll say a wee podcast of me singing it. You can give me your honest opinion.
Oh, brilliant.
On that song. I did that with Stevie Riley in La Bodega, a nice gig. We did it in there, and that again, that's pure romanticism. You might not have liked Wuthering Heights, Paul, but if you really like that River song, because that's just all the same. It's that romantic escapism, isn't it? I love it.
That and Urge for Going was the other one that I really love. Every guest on the podcast, there's always at least one book that they recommend. I think once we're finished recording, I'm going to check that one out. I think that's the first one. I'm going to read that.
And if you've got Netflix, watch Women of Heart and Mind. Fantastic. And it goes well with this because I think David Jaffa was involved with it.
Sadly, we've just about come to the end of the podcast, Linda. If anybody wants to check out Linda's book choices, you can go to my website, www.paulcuddihy.com, and every guest has their own individual page where I just list all the book choices from the various books. I mentioned at the start, you know, in terms of, we spoke about it a couple of times about your album. Obviously, the lockdown maybe slightly knocked things off in terms of schedule. What is the schedule now for the new album?
Well, I kind of got a bit down and left it to the side, but I'm trying at the moment I'm going to try and get in touch to try and do a thing with the Siren book and the Siren album. And I'm writing the second memoir just now, but it's been very difficult because I'm writing the second memoir, and 2 months ago I lived beside the Victoria Infirmary. There was 8 ambulances with the sirens on within an hour and a half. So I've actually brought that into that book, saying I'm trying to write about 1980, but it's 2020. So I need to do something about it, but I don't want to do an online singing thing of that album because I want it to be visceral. I need the feeling of, I always get an extra lead and walk into audiences. As soon as I get an opportunity, I will be launching the album, and I've just got the pile of them sitting there waiting for that. But I am trying to go onto Radio Scotland to get it played, a bit of airplay. As I say, it was on radio. It was the album of the week for a week, right at the very first week of lockdown on Celtic Music Radio. So I need to get back to that. I just had a wee bit of a back bump, you know, when just get a bit down about it. So now I'm kind of starting to say, right, I've got Leslie's book out, I've got that book out. I'm taking a rest from anybody else's work now in August and September. I'll back to the Sirens and try and find ways through radio stations at first. An opportunity to open up for a launch somewhere. Who knows, Paul, where this is going.
Well, fingers crossed, and hopefully sooner or later you're able to perform it to a live audience as well.
It's been lovely talking to you. Thanks very much. I'm going to buy you a pint. It's the first opportunity we get.
Excellent. I'll hold you to that, Linda.
Okay. I'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Read All About It podcast, and I'd love to hear what you thought about it. You can get in touch via Twitter at ReadAllAbout20, on Instagram at ReadAllAboutItPodcast, or you can send an email to readallaboutit@paulcuddihy.com. If you've enjoyed the podcast, subscribe, leave a review and spread the word. If you haven't enjoyed it, say nothing to anybody. But I do hope you can join me, Paul Cuddihy, next time on the Read All About It podcast. And in the meantime, keep reading.